The best revenge is not to become them. It is to make them watch everything they took from you become the instrument of their destruction. My heart stopped at 4:12 p.m. But the man holding my hand wasn't crying. He was checking his watch to see if he could still make his 5 p.m. meeting with the lawyers to steal my company. I know this because I was still there, still present, tucked somewhere behind my own useless eyes like a passenger locked in a car careening off a cliff, fully conscious, completely unable to grab the wheel. The doctors would later call it a terminal event. The nurses would murmur about how peaceful I looked. They were wrong on both counts. There was nothing terminal about what was happening to me, and I was anything but peaceful. I was furious. "It's done," Julian said softly. Not to me. He stopped talking to me sometime in November, around the time my hands started trembling. Now it was March, and he was whispering into his phone with the bedside manner of a man canceling a restaurant reservation. "Yes, it happened. No, don't send flowers yet, that's tacky. Wait 48 hours, then have the PR team draft the statement about my devastating loss." A pause. "The merger documents are on my desk. Have them ready for Monday." He hung up. Then, and this is the part I want you to understand, the part that rewired something fundamental in the architecture of who I was, he leaned forward and kissed my forehead. "You should have just signed it over," he murmured against my cooling skin. "You always did make everything so complicated, Ethan." I had loved this man. I want to sit with that for a moment because I think it matters. I had loved Julian Mercer with the full, embarrassing, architecture-altering weight of a man who had never quite believed he deserved to be loved back. I had given him access to my home, my finances, my board meetings, my body, my most private self. I had thought his restlessness was passion. I had thought his coldness was depth. I had thought his silence, on those long winter mornings when I'd reach across the bed and find him already gone, was simply the language of a man who expressed love through action rather than words. I was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I held 3 advanced degrees. I had restructured failing corporations on 4 continents. I had been called in various publications ruthless, visionary, and the most dangerous man in any room he enters. And I had been entirely, catastrophically, stupidly fooled. The poison had started in the coffee. I know that now. Thallium sulfate, colorless, tasteless, slow-acting, elegant in the way that only truly evil things can be elegant. It mimicked a dozen neurological conditions. By the time my doctors started looking for it, it had been 6 months, and my body had absorbed enough to read as a rare degenerative illness on every scan. They told me I had perhaps another 3 months. Julian had cried at the diagnosis, beautifully. The way he cried at films about dying dogs, with just enough restraint to seem genuine, just enough trembling lip to seem devastated. I was dying in a $4,000 a night private room with a view of the city I had built my empire in. And the man I had planned to marry was calculating the tax implications of inheriting my estate. My last coherent thought, as the monitors began their long, trailing protest and the nurses came rushing in, and Julian stepped back to give them room. Julian, who always gave people exactly as much room as he needed to not be in the way of anything inconvenient, was not grief. It was a question. What if I came back? I woke up in a different hospital, different ceiling, different smell, antiseptic mixed with industrial cleaning fluid instead of the expensive diffuser Julian had insisted on for ambiance. The monitor beside me was a decade older. The gown I was wearing had a faded pattern of small blue diamonds. There was a crack in the upper right corner of the window. I took inventory with the calm precision of a man conducting a site assessment. My hands, smaller. My hair, when I lifted a strand across my vision, a lighter brown. My face, in the small mirror a nurse eventually brought at my confused request, different. Similar enough in structure, broad forehead, defined jaw, but undeniably, verifiably, not mine. "You gave us quite the scare, Mr. Liam," the nurse said cheerfully, scribbling something on a chart. "The car came out of nowhere," they said. "Fractured rib, mild concussion, lucky to be alive." Liam. I let the name settle over me like a coat that almost fit. I was Liam Cole, 29 years old, freelance wedding planner. A man with a modest apartment in the east of the city, a client list that was perpetually one bad review away from collapse, a studio full of fabric swatches and hand-lettered seating charts, and I discovered this when I found his phone in the bedside drawer and scrolled through it with the methodical focus of a forensic accountant. A heart that had loved beauty in the way that only people who could not quite afford it do. Florists left him samples because he wrote them thank you notes. His clients gave him 5-star reviews not for the grandeur of what he created, but for the way he made people feel seen. Ethan Holloway, who had once walked into a room and reduced grown executives to silence, had been transmigrated into a man who sent handwritten birthday cards to his vendors. I should have found this devastating. Instead, I found it useful. I had 3 things Julian did not know I had: the memory of every conversation, every password, every documented lie of a man who had spent 2 years dismantling me, the institutional knowledge of a CEO who had personally overseen 4 hostile takeovers, and now, crucially, the invisibility of a man Julian Mercer would never, in 1,000 years, look out twice. I had asked myself what I would do if I came back. Now I had an answer. The king-hearted do not beg for justice. They build it. On my 7th day in Liam's apartment, my apartment, I found the news. I wasn't looking for it. I was making coffee, relearning the particular ritual of it in a body that took it with oat milk instead of black, and the television I'd left on for noise cut to a business segment. And there he was, Julian Mercer, newly appointed CEO of Holloway Industries, standing in the atrium of my building, wearing my charcoal Tom Ford suit, accepting my award for Industry Visionary of the Quarter, and on his wrist, so casually, so obscenely, so precisely displayed for the camera in the way that only Julian could make something accidental, was my watch. The Patek Philippe 5270G my grandfather had left me, the one I'd been wearing when I died. He was wearing it like a trophy. I set down the coffee cup. I pressed my palms flat against the counter. I breathed. I am not a man who wastes energy on rage. Rage is inefficient. Rage is what happens when you don't have a plan, and I had already, somewhere in the long white quiet of that hospital room, in the days between waking as Liam and orienting myself, begun constructing the architecture of what came next. But I let myself feel it, just for a moment. The full, scalding structural weight of what he had taken. My company, my life, my name, my watch. Then I put it away, and I got to work. The first thing I did was visit my own grave. It took 4 buses to get to the cemetery, which would have struck me as cosmically absurd 3 months ago, and now struck me as simply logistical. I found the plot on the cemetery's public register. Ethan James Holloway. Plot 14C. The grave was 20 days old and already neglected. The flower arrangement, a standard funeral spray, the kind ordered in bulk, had gone dry. The stone was temporary, a placeholder, no personal inscription. Julian had been quoted in the obituary as too overcome with grief to make immediate arrangements. His Instagram, which I had pulled up on Liam's phone, told a different story. His latest post, 2 days ago, was a black and white photo of a coffee cup and a half-read book. The caption read, "Some mornings the grief hits like the first light, heavy, then slowly, beautiful. Learning to carry what cannot be put down." Blue, heart emoji, #healing, #Ethan forever. It had 14,000 likes. I stood at my own grave for a long time. I thought about the man that I had been, brilliant, yes, and capable, yes, but also profoundly self-destructively unwilling to believe that someone could look directly at everything I had and want only it, never me. I had been so hungry to be chosen, so convinced that if I could just be useful enough, present enough, generous enough, if I could just make myself indispensable enough, that love would follow the way revenue followed a sound acquisition strategy. I had audited every aspect of my industry and never once audited the man sleeping beside me. That man was on his Instagram posting grief bait while my flowers rotted. I crouched down and removed the dead arrangement, placed in its stead a single white peony from the bunch I'd brought, Liam's favorite I'd learned from scrolling his messages and now mine, and I made myself a promise. Not of destruction, something more considered than that. Something with structure and sequencing and the cold, load-bearing precision of a building designed to last. Julian would not just lose everything he'd taken, he would watch it happen. He would understand at the moment it collapsed exactly why, and the why would be delivered by a ghost. The best trap is the one the target builds themselves. Julian announced the wedding competition on a Tuesday. He was engaged. Had been, it turned out, since the month before I died, to Marcus Vale, the only son of Roland Vale, whose pharmaceutical empire was currently circling Holloway Industries' pharmaceutical division like a very patient, very expensive shark. The engagement had been kept quiet out of respect. The wedding, Julian had told a Breathless Society reporter, was to be the event of the year. 100 vendors were invited to pitch for the contract. The winner would receive full access to Julian's schedule, household, and private estate for the duration of the planning period. I read this on a Thursday morning, drinking oat milk coffee I had not yet learned to enjoy, and felt the specific sensation of a chess grandmaster seeing the endgame from the opening move. I had spent month 1 becoming Liam, not performing him, becoming him, with the same rigor I'd applied to every acquisition. I'd taken his client files and understood his aesthetic, romantic, architectural, emotionally intelligent. I'd studied his past work and found it genuinely beautiful, which surprised me. I'd reached out to his vendors, reactivated his social media, and booked 2 small events to rebuild the portfolio. I was, within 30 days, a better version of Liam Cole than Liam Cole had ever been. Now I was going to use him to walk through the front door of my own stolen company. The competition pitch was held at the Meridian Hotel, 40 floors of glass and marble that Julian had always preferred for impressions. I arrived last, which I had calculated for. 23 other firms ahead of me, design houses, event management corporations, a team flown in from London. I sat in the waiting area in a charcoal linen suit and watched them emerge from the conference room, confident, polished, each carrying the faint residue of Julian's particular brand of dismissal on their faces. When they called my name, I walked in carrying one item, a single silver tray covered with a cloth. Julian sat at the head of the table with 2 associates and Marcus Vale beside him. Marcus was handsome in the architectural way of men whose families have been wealthy for enough generations that good bone structure has become heritable. He looked bored. Julian looked exactly as he always did in business settings, immaculate, attentive, constructed. He did not recognize me. Why would he? I was not Ethan. I was 20 pounds lighter, 2 inches shorter, with different eyes and a different jaw. I was Liam Cole, a mid-tier freelancer with a charming portfolio and precisely 0 reason to be in this room. "Mr. Cole," Julian said, "you have 15 minutes. "I only need 5, I said. I removed the cloth from the tray. On it sat a single glass of wine, poured from a bottle I had sourced with considerable effort and expense, a 2004 Domaine de la Romanie Conti, Ethan Holloway's signature vintage. The bottle served at every major Holloway Industries contract signing. The bottle that had been poured on the night Julian and I had first said we loved each other. I watched his face. I had always been good at reading Julian. I simply hadn't wanted to believe what I was reading. Now I read him with academic detachment. He went still. Not the stillness of recognition, the stillness of a man who has encountered something that doesn't fit his current model of reality. His eyes dropped to the glass. His jaw tightened fractionally. A vein in his temple, visible only to someone who had spent 2 years studying that exact face across pillow and boardroom table, pulsed once. "The Vale-Holloway merger," I said, speaking with Liam's voice but Ethan's cadence, the particular unhurried rhythm of someone who has never needed to perform urgency, will be the most watched corporate wedding of the decade. The aesthetic cannot be generic, it cannot be safe. I walked the length of the table slowly. Your fiancé's family values legacy. Yours, the one you've built, values precision. The wedding must speak both languages simultaneously, or it will be read as a transaction, which, of course, I paused, just a half beat. It is, but it doesn't have to look that way. Julian was staring at the glass of wine. I chose that vintage because it's the one served at every significant threshold in the history of Holloway Industries. It carries weight. It says, "This moment matters." That's what I want your wedding to say. I set Liam's portfolio on the table. I know what that company means, Mr. Mercer. I know exactly what it's built on. The silence lasted 4 seconds. "You have the contract," Julian said. Marcus looked at him, surprised. Julian didn't look back. He was still looking at the glass of wine with the expression of a man hearing music from a room that should be empty. I gathered my portfolio. "I'll need full access to the estate for 6 months, and I'll need the private study for vendor coordination. My process requires—" "Whatever you need," Julian said. I smiled with Liam's mouth. "Whatever I need." How generous. You cannot hunt a ghost, but a ghost can hunt you. There is an art to psychological dismantling, and like all art, it requires patience, precision, and a willingness to understand your subject more intimately than they understand themselves. I knew Julian Mercer's interior architecture as well as I knew my own. Better, perhaps, since I had spent 2 years studying him and he had never once bothered to study me beyond what was financially useful. I knew his insomnia patterns. I knew the particular fear he carried from a childhood of financial precarity. The reason he slept in silk pajamas and checked his investment accounts before bed. The reason every room he occupied had to signal affluence. The reason he had killed me rather than simply leave. Leaving would have required starting over. Julian did not start over. Julian acquired and held. I knew his tells. The slight forward lean when he was dissembling. The way he touched his collar when he felt watched. The way he could not bear disorder in his peripheral vision. How a shifted frame, a moved vase, a slightly asymmetric arrangement would pull at his attention like a splinter. Month 3 was about reintroducing him to Ethan Holloway. Very slowly, very quietly. I began in the private study. I had 24/7 access. Julian had been sincere about that. The merger negotiations were moving quickly, and having the wedding planner embedded in the household meant he could approve decisions without interrupting his schedule. He barely noticed me after the first week. I was furniture. Liam was furniture. Helpful, reliable, tasteful furniture. Which meant I could move things. Ethan had a specific organizational logic, one I had developed over 15 years of systematic thinking. Books arranged by frequency of reference rather than alphabetically. Pens in sets of 3, never 2, never 4. A particular angle for the desk lamp, 17 degrees off-center, which I had once explained to Julian, meant the light fell correctly on the left-hand page of any open document. Julian laughed at this, called me compulsive. Now, I recreated it, fraction by fraction, each week. The study inched toward Ethan's configuration like a compass needle correcting north. Julian did not consciously notice. His unconscious, however, was a different matter. I saw it in the way he paused at the study door sometimes. The slight frown, the recalibration. He would move something back, a book, a pen set, and within 2 days, I would move it again. We were having a conversation he didn't know we were having. Then came the Post-its. I had spent 3 evenings replicating Ethan's handwriting. It was distinctive, architectural, angular, the cursive of a man who'd attended a boarding school that still taught penmanship as character formation. I'd found samples in Ethan's published letters in the company archives. I practiced until Liam's hand produced it faithfully. The first note I left on Julian's calendar blotter, tucked beneath a stack of merger documents. Don't forget the veil clause on intellectual property, P12. No signature, just the dash. Julian's EA found it, brought it to Julian with a frown. "Did you write this, sir? I don't recognize the handwriting." I watched through the study's glass partition as Julian took the note, as the color left his face. He looked at it for a long time. "Shredded," he said. The second note appeared 3 days later. This one in the margin of the catering proposal I'd left for his review, in handwriting even more distinctly Ethan's. "The Vouvray is better. You always preferred the Vouvray." Ethan had told Julian this approximately 60 times over 2 years. Julian had never cared about wine. He drank it for appearances. When I came in the following morning, the catering proposal had been swept off the desk. Julian was already in the room, standing in the middle of it, and he turned when I entered with the specific, controlled stillness of a man who was very, very afraid. "Who was in here yesterday?" he asked. "Only me," I said, with Liam's easy concern. "Is something wrong?" He looked at me, through me, the way people look when they're searching for something they know they won't find. "Nothing," he said. "Order the Vouvray." But the flowers were the masterpiece. The poison Julian had used was thallium sulfate, but the carrier had been an extract of white oleander, a compound that in sublethal doses carries a distinctive, sharp, sweet green scent that registered for me in those final months of dying as the smell of something wrong. The body knows before the mind does. I had spent weeks in those final months not understanding why Julian's presence sometimes made my throat close slightly, why certain rooms in our home made me faintly nauseated. Now I knew. He had used oleander extract as scent-masking agent in the diffusers. While I was being poisoned, I was also being, daily, marinated in the smell of my own death. For the cake tasting in month 4, I designed the floral arrangements myself. White oleander, tiny traces, purely decorative, well within safety limits for humans, but present unmistakably in the scent profile of the room. Julian walked into the tasting and stopped as if he'd walked into a wall. I watched him from across the table, clipboard in hand, Liam's professional smile arranged across my face like a mask. He sat down. He was quiet. He reached for his water glass and gripped it. I watched his knuckles whiten. I watched the fine tremor begin in his right hand, the same tremor I had learned to hide for 6 months while he watched, impassively as it worsened. "Are you all right?" I asked. "The flowers," he said, his voice carefully flat. "What are these flowers?" "Oleander," I said pleasantly. "They're in season. Beautiful, aren't they? Very delicate, almost ghostly in the right light." He excused himself 3 minutes later. I heard him in the hallway, on his phone, voice rapid and low. I couldn't make out all of it, but I heard one phrase clearly, and I filed it with the precision of a man who files everything. "It's like he's still here." Good, I thought, uncapping my pen and making a neat note on the floral order sheet. He is. A building falls from the foundation. Begin there. By month 5, Julian Mercer was not sleeping. I could see it in the micro-expressions he'd never bothered to hide because he'd never believed anyone was reading him. The tissue-thin skin beneath his eyes, the slight drag of his left foot at the end of long days, the way his handshake at the wedding dinners I now attended as the wedding planner coordinating room layouts had lost its hydraulic precision. Julian always had a metronomic handshake, firm, timed, calibrated. Now it varied. Now it was sometimes fractionally too hard, sometimes fractionally too brief. He was coming apart, and he had, with extraordinary irony, begun leaning on me. Liam. Liam, who was quiet and observant and never seemed to want anything except for the wedding to be beautiful. Liam, who made Julian tea without being asked. Liam, who noticed when Julian was avoiding the west wing of the estate, which I had, gradually, come to understand was where Julian's private safe was located behind the Hockney print in the corridor, and who never pushed, never probed, never did anything except make Julian feel seen in the uncomplicated way that lonely, guilty people desperately need. "You're the only person in this house who doesn't want something from me," Julian said once, late at night, sitting on the estate terrace with a glass of wine he wasn't drinking. "I want everything from you," I thought. "I just want the wedding to be perfect," I said. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face in years. Genuine, unguarded, almost vulnerable. For a moment, I saw the man I had thought he was. Cultured, intelligent, capable of depth. And I understood, with the cold clarity I had earned, that this was the most dangerous version of Julian Mercer, the version that could make you believe, if you weren't careful, that the cruelty was circumstantial rather than constitutional. I had made that mistake once. "Tell me about Ethan Holloway," I said. The silence was extraordinary. "Why?" His voice was very quiet. "His watch," I said, nodding at the Patek Philippe on his wrist. "You wear it every day. I assumed he mattered to you." Julian looked down at the watch. His jaw worked. I watched him construct the answer, weigh its components, decide which version of grief would be most useful here. "He was the best person I ever knew," Julian said, "and I failed him." The audacity was genuinely breathtaking. "I'm sorry," I said. "I think about him constantly," he said. "I think I always will." "I'm sure he'd want you to be happy." I almost meant it in a way. Ethan Holloway had wanted Julian to be happy, had wanted it with a specificity and a tenderness that had made him easy to kill. That version of Ethan was buried in Plot 14C with a dead flower arrangement and a temporary headstone. This version of Ethan had other plans. The Vale family, I had discovered through 6 weeks of careful social reconnaissance, was not what it appeared. Roland Vale had agreed to this merger because he needed Holloway Industries' pharmaceutical patents to paper over a regulatory crisis in 3 of his European subsidiaries. The wedding was a theater, a narrative of personal alliance to make a financial desperation maneuver look like destiny. The only thing that could derail it was doubt. The only doubt that would matter was doubt about Julian's stability. The board of Holloway Industries was already uneasy. I had been seeding this carefully, through channels Liam Cole had no business accessing, but Ethan Holloway knew intimately. A word here to a former colleague who didn't know he was talking to a dead man, a document left in the wrong place, an anonymous tip to the company's outside legal counsel about the unusual pattern of decisions in the 6 months following the CEO's death. But the real lever was simpler. Marcus Vale had a best friend, a woman named Kara, who was his closest confidant and whose opinion he trusted absolutely. I had found this from Liam's Instagram of all places. Marcus had commented on a photo of Kara's, warmly, the kind of comment that revealed the texture of a friendship. I had found Kara's contact information. I had sent her, from an anonymized account, a single file, Julian's medical records from his private physician, which I had photographed during a carefully scheduled moment when Julian had left his study to take a call, leaving the file visible on his desk. The records documented what his physician had, with admirable medical discretion, called acute anxiety episodes with dissociative features, 4 in the past 3 months, 1 requiring sedation. I attached a note. Ask Marcus if he knows. He deserves to. 48 hours later, Julian received a call from Roland Vale that lasted 11 minutes and left him standing at the estate window with the particular stillness of a man watching a wall he'd built begin to crack. He came to find me immediately. Liam, his only trusted confidant, who was coordinating the seating arrangements in the East reception room. The Vale family is having doubts. Roland wants to delay. By how much? I asked. Potentially indefinitely. His voice had the calibrated calm of a man who has spent a lifetime not letting cracks show. Then we make the wedding undeniable, I said. Something so beautiful, so unimpeachable that it removes all doubt. I looked at him steadily. Trust me with it, entirely. I'll handle everything. He looked at me for a long moment. The safe in the corridor, he said slowly. There are documents in there, private merger agreements, board communications. If any of that got out, show me where it is. I'll make sure the security during the event is absolute. And Julian Mercer, who had killed a man for his access codes, handed the keys to his safe to his wedding planner. Because he trusted me. Because everyone trusts Liam. Let them dance, then close the exits. The wedding was held on a Saturday in June at the Holloway estate, which was of course my estate, though Liam Cole did not know this, and Julian Mercer had stopped thinking of it that way. 230 guests, 12 vendor teams, 6 months of planning executed with the kind of total, immaculate architectural perfection that Liam Cole had always been capable of, and Ethan Holloway had now sharpened to a weapon. Every element was correct. The flowers, cascading white roses and green hellebore, elegant and expensive. The music, a string quartet playing arrangements Marcus Vale had chosen personally, which told me Marcus, at least, had genuine feeling for this. The lighting, golden, soft, the kind of light that makes everyone look like the best version of themselves. Julian looked extraordinary. He always did in a room he'd curated. He moved through the pre-ceremony gathering like a man who had earned this. Warm, gracious, the picture of a grieving man who had found, after genuine loss, a second chance at happiness. I watched him from the coordinator's position at the back of the room, clipboard in hand, earpiece in, Liam's comfortable invisibility wrapped around me like a second skin. At exactly 2 o'clock, the ceremony began. At exactly 2:47, as the officiant reached the vows, I walked to the AV control desk I had personally overseen the installation of, and I entered the code I had prepared. The projection screen behind the altar, a design choice I had sold to Julian as a cinematic backdrop for the vows, something the guests will remember forever, lit up. The first image, Julian's Instagram posts, the grief bait, the black and white coffee cup. Some mornings, the grief hits like the first light. The post had been made 4 days after Ethan Holloway's funeral. 3 days before, Julian had filed the paperwork to assume full control of the company, citing a clause in the partnership agreement that Ethan's legal team had never found because Julian had had it inserted by a compromised paralegal 2 years prior. The room went very quiet. The second image, Julian's phone records, specifically a call made at 4:19 p.m. on the day Ethan Holloway died, 7 minutes after the time of death, to the lead mergers attorney. The call had lasted 22 minutes. "What is this?" Marcus said. His voice was very controlled. The third thing was not an image. It was audio. 40 seconds, recorded on Ethan's phone, which I had found in the safe in a small box, along with the finalized version of Ethan's will, altered, Ethan's original corporate voting proxy, forged, and a receipt for a private lab in Switzerland that specialized in compound pharmacological analysis. Julian had kept it. Why he had kept it I could not say with certainty, perhaps as insurance. Perhaps from some dark sentimental impulse, perhaps because he was the kind of man who kept trophies. The audio was from a night 6 months before Ethan's death. Julian on the phone, voice low and certain, walking through his own dining room, unaware that Ethan's phone, which Julian had borrowed to play music and left face down on the dining table, had continued recording. Quote, "The thallium compound is colorless, completely tasteless. The lab confirmed it mimics Lewy body dementia on standard panels. By the time they find it, if they find it, he'll have been dead long enough for the estate transfer to be legally uncontestable." A pause. "The watch? I'll keep the watch. Sentimental." Yes, I know how that sounds. Call it a reminder. Every empire needs a foundation stone. 230 people heard this. The room was so silent I could hear the string quartet in the anteroom, still playing, unaware. Julian was standing at the altar. The color had not so much left his face as evacuated it, leaving something that was no longer quite recognizable as the man I had known. Marcus had taken one step back from him. Roland Vale was already on his phone. 3 board members of Holloway Industries were in attendance. I had invited them personally, framing it as strategic relationship cultivation, and all 3 were now looking at one another with the specific expression of people constructing exit strategies. I walked from the AV desk to the center aisle. I walked the full length of it slowly, the way Ethan Holloway had always entered rooms, without hurry, without performance, with the absolute confidence of a man who has already won before anyone else knows the game has started. 230 people watched me walk. Julian watched me walk. His eyes tracked me with the expression of a man seeing something his brain refused to categorize. I stopped 2 feet in front of him. I held his gaze, Liam's eyes, Ethan's expression. Then I leaned forward, close enough that no one else could hear, and I said 4 words, words that Ethan had whispered to Julian on their first night together in a hotel room in Vienna, words that Julian had claimed to have forgotten, words that existed in no written record, no recording, no documentation of any kind. 4 words that only 2 people in the world had ever shared. I watched it happen. The moment of recognition, not of Liam. Liam he would never recognize, but of something beneath Liam, something older and more fundamental and entirely, absolutely undestroyable. The moment a man realizes that the ghost was not a ghost at all, that the chess game he had been playing had been simultaneously the entire time being played against him on a board he hadn't known existed. The terror that crossed his face was honestly extraordinary. It was the face of a man who had believed in the absolute completeness of his own cruelty, who had been certain with the certainty of the truly monstrous that dead men do not come back, that the people we silence stay silent, that wealth and coldness and careful planning are sufficient armor against consequence. He had forgotten, had perhaps never understood, that the most dangerous person in any room is not the one with the most power. It is the one who has nothing left to lose and everything to rebuild. The doors at the back of the room opened. 4 police officers. The lead detective had been given a comprehensive file 3 days prior. The safe's contents, the audio recording, the lab receipt, and 17 months of documented evidence organized with the thoroughness of a CEO who had personally overseen 4 corporate legal investigations. The file had been assembled by Liam Cole. The knowledge that assembled it belonged to Ethan Holloway. As the detective approached the altar, Julian's legs, those immaculate, tailored legs that had carried him through boardrooms and lain beside me in the dark, buckled, just fractionally, just enough. "Julian Mercer," the detective said, "you are under arrest for the murder of Ethan James Holloway." The watch caught the light as they cuffed his wrists, my grandfather's watch, the 5270G, the foundation stone of a dead man's empire worn as a trophy for 6 months, and now, as Julian was walked from the altar of his own wedding, gleaming in the June light like a final, perfect punctuation mark. I looked at it one last time. Then I turned and walked back toward the exit, through the frozen, silent assembly of guests, past the white roses and the green hellebore, and the string quartet who had finally, belatedly, stopped playing. The king-hearted do not celebrate, they simply continue. There is a postscript to all of this that I think deserves telling. 3 weeks after Julian's arrest, after the board of Holloway Industries voted unanimously to reverse the fraudulent transfer of the CEO position, after Marcus Vale's family quietly withdrew from all associated business dealings, after the story ran in every financial publication in the country with the specific, breathless energy of a scandal that confirms everything everyone had always quietly suspected, I went back to the cemetery. I brought a proper arrangement this time. White peonies. The stone had been upgraded, I noticed. The company's executive team had quietly arranged it once the full story became public, a gesture of institutional guilt that I found neither satisfying nor offensive. It was simply a stone. It had my name on it. Ethan James Holloway, visionary, friend, a man who never forgot what mattered. I sat on the bench across from it for a while. I thought about the question I had asked myself at the moment of death. What if I came back? I had come back. Not as Ethan. Ethan was in the ground, and whatever I was now occupied a different body, carried a different name, had different hands. I was Liam Cole, wedding planner, 29, survivor of a car accident, resident of a modest East City apartment with a studio full of fabric swatches. I was also, somehow, still Ethan Holloway, every memory, every skill, every careful and hard-won understanding of the world intact. I was not sure what to make of this, of being two men at once, of carrying a dead man's grief inside a living man's body, of having prosecuted the most meticulous revenge of my considerable life and feeling, now that it was complete, not triumph exactly, but something quieter. Something that had more in common with the white peony I'd placed at the headstone than with the audio-visual presentation that had destroyed Julian Mercer in front of 230 witnesses. Completion, perhaps. The closing of a ledger, the final reconciliation of an account that had been left dramatically out of balance. I stood up, straightened the arrangement, looked at the stone for a last moment. Then I pulled out Liam's phone, opened his portfolio website, and accepted the 3 new client inquiries that had come in since the Mercer event. Because the Mercer event, of course, had been impeccably documented by every guest with a phone, and a wedding planner who dismantles a murderer at the altar while maintaining perfect floral arrangements is, it turns out, the kind of story that goes viral with extraordinary speed. Liam Cole Events had a 6-month wait list by Thursday. I walked to the bus stop in the June warmth, and I thought about Ethan Holloway, who had been brilliant and kind and catastrophically trusting. And I thought about Liam Cole, who was talented and observant and quietly, immovably good. And I decided that the man I was becoming, whoever that was, in whatever body, carrying whatever name, was perhaps better than either of them alone. The bus came. I got on. The city moved past the windows, glass and steel and the particular gold light of a summer afternoon, ordinary and vast and entirely, completely full of next moves. They buried the wrong thing. They buried the body, but they could never bury the mind that built the board. I was a chess grandmaster of revenge, and the board was still open.
The end.